Hi everyone, my name is Ghorbani and I'm here to talk to you about classroom management with Microsoft Teams. I'll be talking about screen sharing, how to make your online classroom environment as interactive as possible, monitoring, uh, time management, as well as teacher development in my presentation. Regarding screen sharing, well, of course, this is one of the main features on Microsoft Teams that allows teachers to share their screen showing PowerPoints, websites, or even a shared document for an instant collaboration between the students during a group work or a open class discussion. The best advantage of sharing a screen for the student is perhaps helping them with note taking. The way how I have used sharing a screen function is to open a blank Word file and take notes as we learn new concepts. And whenever I am typing, for example, one paragraph, I usually wait until all my students have taken notes. This enables the students to take notes easily and as accurately as possible. And when you are in a real classroom environment, of course, you might be able to check and see those student notes sometimes. And when you are teaching online, you don't have that access anymore, unless the students are taking their notes using OneNote app on Microsoft Teams. And when the students are using OneNote, all teachers within that team will have access to those notes at all times, and no other students actually can see another student's notes because they are guests on Teams. About the notes that teachers have taken in the class, I would also recommend not to share them with the students after the session because the students need to feel that if they don't take those notes during the session, they will fall behind other classmates, and therefore they will be in trouble, and you want to keep them on their toes by asking them to take notes. Regarding Microsoft Whiteboard, it has improved a lot during the last few months or so. It has now other features such as sticky notes. You can use Microsoft Whiteboard for brainstorming ideas from the students. You can use it for creating mind maps, and I have used it during my math sessions, where I usually ask my students to write their answers on the whiteboard. So in fact, my style of teaching in terms of mathematics hasn't changed a lot comparing face-to-face classes to online. And in fact, moving online was a little bit easier because the whiteboard you are using on Microsoft Teams is unlimited. So you can ask many students to write their answers at the same time on different parts of this whiteboard. Having said that, after a while, I had some troubles with using whiteboard because it was a little bit slow, or some of my students couldn't open the file. So I moved to Microsoft PowerPoint, and I used to draw the draw function, the marker, with the students. So for example, I assigned different slides to each student, and I asked them to solve those math questions on their own slides. I'm gonna show you an example of the two examples I've got here. So this one, for instance, is for the math class, statistics class. You can see the students have written their answers. I have marked them, or have added some things. I have showed where the marks lie. And even for business studies, for instance, I have you can use it for graphs. Now these slides will be there for the students to check later on after the class, and you just need to share a link with the students. Just make sure that in the class content file you have organized each PowerPoint, named them, and labeled them in a way that students can find them easily after the session. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Now, how can we make our online learning environment as interactive as possible? Well, you might think that when you move from face-to-face class to an online platform like Microsoft Teams, you're gonna end up with a lot of teacher talk, and your classroom unintentionally sometimes becomes more teacher-centered. However, the features that are available on Microsoft Teams allow instructors to make online learning environment as interactive as normal face-to-face classrooms. For instance, you can use channels for pair work or for group discussions, and once they have discussed the questions together, bring them back to the main channel using tags and ask each group to present their findings to the rest of the class. You would also need to nominate students frequently and fairly during those sessions, so you give all students a chance to speak during the session. And for open class discussions, I would usually avoid those type of questions on Teams, because students are not responding to them. Usually either they are shy or they may not be confident with their answers. So even in case if your question is quite general and you think everybody can answer, they might not answer because they don't want to they don't want to interrupt another student, or they don't want to speak at the same time. So here you can use the raise hand function for open class discussions, and you would need to train your students to use that button when they want to speak. So you would need to ask them individually, then give that chance to that student. Another feature that you can use to make it quite interactive is to use short video clips from YouTube or elsewhere, so the students are engaged during the lesson. And if you can have a question prepared in advance before watching the video, that and that question is answered towards the end of that video that you are screening, then the students would watch it, and you will be able to ask the question later on and get the answers from the students. And here I would recommend to share your screen and share your audio on the screen, that I'm going to show you how to do that now. So I'm going to stop sharing my file. So I have mentioned earlier in the video that teachers can and should monitor student notes on OneNote, but teachers can also monitor the discussions, the live discussions in the channel, as we do usually in a normal classroom when we are having the group work between the students. Teacher would monitor the students, and sometimes if they think the students are not doing the correct task, they might intervene. So the same thing applies here on Teams. And also monitoring would help the teachers to nominate the students or pairs or groups with correct answers later on. So as a teacher, you should be able to move across different teams, different channels within Teams, and take notes of the correct answers from those groups and who you want to nominate, and perhaps even take notes of their mistakes that you would like to bring them up later during the class for anonymous correction as part of the feedback you would like to provide your students with. The other practical benefit of monitoring is when to move on to the next activity, or perhaps the next chunk of your lesson plan. For instance, in my math sessions, at first I had some difficulty with timing when I should move to the next example in the textbook. So normally in a face-to-face classroom environment, I would monitor the students, see who has finished first and how many students have finished, so then I can move on to the next example, or even go over the same example and solve it together. But when we moved online on Teams, I lost that monitoring. And David suggested me to ask the students to send stickers in the chat function, in the chat room. So when they have finished their work, I would be able to see how many students have answered the questions and have solved those problems. It really helped me a lot in order to know when to move on to the next example. Another thing to bear in mind here is that if your students are having their routine of participation in the channels as discussions, in the chat in terms of commenting and sending those stickers, and they are also maybe raising their voice within the session and they are raising their hands in the class, their webcams are on, then you normally end up with a very engaging and active classroom environment that you want. And it's very, very important that you set these habits from the very first class that you are going to teach with, of course, close collaboration with the other teachers, other instructors, because we had this experience of two distinct classes, and one of them from the very early stage of orientation with Microsoft Teams started to use webcams, and they kept using turning on their webcam on until the end of the semester. Whereas we had the other group which didn't turn on when we didn't pay attention. It was extremely hard for the instructors to convince them to turn their webcams on. Now, the transition between face-to-face class and an online classroom environment is really, really different in terms of the class pace. So you should really plan the specific and general learning outcomes that you are covering within a semester, and allow more time to cover them online, since the pace will drop massively when you are teaching online. And in order to avoid rushing learning outcomes towards the end of your semester or academic year, you should heavily rely on planning. Make sure that the types of activities that you are planning to use on Teams have the required documents, for instance, the shared files, ready for each group, so you don't need to waste any time during the class to duplicate documents, to create the documents, or to name the document and distribute it to the students. You just basically share a link, a prepared link to each group, so they can work together on that document and you can monitor them. And also, I would suggest to distinguish between assignments as an assignment tab that we have seen on Teams and homework. At our center, we distinguish them by assigning summative tasks, usually essays, on the assignment tab within Teams, and we use Microsoft Forms for homework. Now, in order to give quicker feedback to the students, particularly if your homework is designed in a way that has a single word answer or it's numerical, then you would be able to set quiz or set quiz within the Myring forms with the correct answer. And it automatically marks the student work. So teachers would be able to track the student progress, and it's quicker in terms of giving that feedback to the student. The last thing I would like to cover in this presentation is in terms of teacher development within Teams. I would recommend to record the sessions. This has the benefit for the absent students to watch the lessons later on, and also the ones that were present but they were not clear about certain aspects or certain parts within a lesson, so they would be able to watch those videos again. And when you record a session, it's usually stored on stream. Guests don't have access to those videos, so you would need to download them and then upload them onto files within Teams. However, the colleagues, instructors at your center would have access to each other's videos, and I recommend teachers for a peer class observation using those recorded lessons. Every teacher, of course, has a certain style of using Microsoft Teams, and by having peer class observations, we would be able to share best practices and get new ideas from one another. Collaborative training sessions throughout the academic year at various points prior, during, and after the classes the academic year would also benefit your instructors. Also, the new teachers who might join the next year, for instance, to your center, they would be able to use those recorded lessons as part of their preparation for their own classes.
For the next little bit, we want to take into consideration some of the preliminary actions and agreements that will really benefit you and your team and your organization if you have given them some thought and made some relatively firm decisions about them before getting started. There are a number of considerations that are not necessarily displayed by teams, but that you have to have an understanding of as an administrator or as a user or creator of the various channels and various forms of access that you'll be provided and or will be providing to the various members of your organization. So if you're thinking about the different members who are likely to have their hands on these different Teams channels and groups, and what kind of access they're going to need. So within our experience, we found that some administrators within our organization, as well as the academic teams, needed relatively high-level access. So providing them with ownership once a team has created. So for example, here we're going to build a team from scratch. We'll make it organization-wide. We won't call it that. We can call it organization-wide. Program will then create the team, and immediately you really need to get into management. And here we see the distinction between owner and member, and those distinctions allow different levels of access. So for anybody who is going to be adding people, adding content, removing content, connecting other channels and other teams, they need this ownership level access. Otherwise, there are going to be a lot of restrictions and or things which will require other people's intervention. And so if you're not always in the office at the same time as other key stakeholders, you're going to find that it really slows down operations, and it may make it impossible to add new people. It may make it impossible to add new content. And this is the kind of stuff that makes the system appear to not function well, even though it's not necessarily a factor of the system's functioning. It's more a consideration of how it's being used by the operators. And a lot of this is learn as you go, right? We found that a lot of what we were doing seemed like it ought to be obvious. And then Microsoft had different levels of access and permissions and restrictions and requirements, so that most of them appear to be security features to prevent outside parties from sort of infiltrating, your channels and your groups, and to prevent people from deleting or adding things that were, where they weren't meant to be doing that. Possibly prior to, and more likely following, the creation of the Teams channels and the different levels of access is an important conversation of who's actually going to run, who's actually going to operate the system at large, who's going to be in charge of the overall structure, who's going to be in charge of allowing access to other participants. If that's clarified and all of the different members and participants and stakeholders are clear about to whom they need to speak to make requests or get things shut down or get things initiated. It's going to streamline the overall process a lot more than what we found was kind of a lot of ad hoc or on-the-fly decision making, and if various participants weren't updated about those changes, it can cause a lot of unnecessary frustrations. So clarify who are the gatekeepers of operations with the overall platform and also with the individual teams and channels and so on. And share that information. I think one thing that we recognized very early on was the more people who had eyes and hands on the high-level information, the more seamlessly we were able to make it appear as though we knew how to use the platform effectively. And that was a big confidence builder. And it really eased a lot of tensions with our students when we had to suddenly go fully digital, fully remote. And a lot of them had never used such a platform before, but having a few understandings of some of the very high-level considerations made a big difference for us. So we really highly recommend getting that locked down and making it either flexible enough so that it can be adjusted on the fly, or strict enough so that, you know, it's not going to be adjusted for a long time and everybody can simply rely on the fact that this is the structure and this is what we will use. So along those lines, when you're creating channels, it's really important to be considerate of who is going to have access to those channels. Our decision was that we made a private group for each of the different channels that we created. So the channels might be relative to different groups, they might be relative to different subjects, they might be relative to different departments within an organization, whatever your needs are. But within each of those, as long as it was purely academic related, we created a channel that was strictly for teachers. So nobody who wasn't included in this channel, even though it's within the team, if you're not included in that channel, you're not able to access it. You're not able to update content or anything like that. So if we wanted to comment about student progress, or if we wanted to comment about changes in scheduling and whatnot, this provided a forum for us to safely get ideas out, even when we weren't in the same location. We did so asynchronously, and it allowed for a conversation to continue, even though folks were not face to face. So there you have the locked teachers group, and within that we can of course have conversations, we can make groups, subgroups. I think maybe most importantly, we can add files here. So if you have your syllabus and your digital gradebook and your digital attendance sheets and materials for future lessons and so on, all of that can be put here, and this can then act as a very functional database, and you don't have to worry about necessarily printing or emailing, you have easy access of this from various locations. And then in addition, files and folders located within the files section here can then be duplicated and moved elsewhere. So if you have, let's say, rules in your organization for student conduct or something like this, and every class uses those same, the student handbook, for example, all of the classes use that student handbook, then it can simply be copied and pasted into another forum, and everybody always knows where to go to find the so-called original document, and so it's not a constant scavenger hunt to find these kind of standardized materials and resources, and they also exist in digital form. One way we found to consistently leverage the use of the system by using the system was to create training programs and platforms within teams that explained how to do new things within teams via Teams. So that way everybody was getting a very condensed experience with, for many people, a brand new platform in terms of the chat, the file uploading, the creation of new channels and teams and ownership and membership and all of the different variations that can be configured within the program straight from inside the program. So, for example, rather than creating a PowerPoint or a PDF and then emailing it to people, we may have created that same PowerPoint or PDF and given it to them directly via Teams that included a walkthrough in order for them to gain access, for example. So here's just a brief example of that. I've created a new channel. It's called Training. Maybe I'm going to, so at organization wide, please check the Files tab at the top here to find walkthroughs and templates of things we need for course creation. Boom. Okay, so I send this. So number one, I've got a conversation started. Then if somebody is to go ahead and check through the files, they find the Teams training doc, right? So that's already been, the folder has been created. And then in addition to that, and this was a big deal for us anyway, because we had a lot of people who were experimenting with the platform, and you may find that you're in that same position. One thing that we found useful was creating templates. The creation of those templates, for example, the attendance template, means number one, that it can be copied and remade with minimal effort, and it still has all of the same capabilities and functioning of previous versions or additional versions. But also, if there are people who are new to the platform or less confident with the platform, the learning curve is greatly reduced, right? It's made far steeper because it takes them less time to figure out how to do the things. A lot of the stuff we found, if one person knows how to do it, that's enough, because they can create the template and then everybody else can simply use it. Now, if you want people to learn how to do everything for themselves, you can also leverage the program to, create that kind of training program. But if you don't have a need for that, and we didn't necessarily, simply creating templates and letting people follow them, either copy them or follow in simple instructions, makes it so that everybody can get on with their actual work, right? Which is one thing that we were also very cognizant of, making sure that running this platform didn't become a second, third job for everyone. Some people took ownership of that, and that was good, and that's another important consideration for your organization. Do the people who actually know how to use the platform most effectively and most efficiently have a say in how it's being used? That can really save a lot of time and streamline a lot of the processes as well. And our main goal through most of this was to get your MVP, your sort of minimum viable product, right, out to the market, the so-called market, which was making sure that our students had something that they could use, and making sure that our academic staff had something that they could use, and making sure that the non-academic staff understood how all of that was being used, so that when they received inquiries from customers and students, they were able to confidently provide information about that. So having these training docs is good for people who are just learning it. And you can, the folder itself, this training folder and its contents are also a template. And that template means that if somebody else wants to create a template folder for a different component, maybe, onboarding students, for example, which is typically a face-to-face operation, well, the templates can be created and put in there, and then they exist indefinitely. And so it doesn't have to be recreated on the fly, and everybody eventually can learn, the first place to go is into this database that's within Teams, and I'm likely to find information there about whichever topic it is. If there isn't information already in this quote-unquote database, now is also a good opportunity to go ahead and create that information, because it's going to be needed again. One more common theme that impacted all participants on our teams was the structural documents that we needed for courses and classes. At one point we found that we were all independently creating a lot of different styles of documents, and that created bottlenecks when it came to administration of courses and when it came to working with students. When things looked different, it wasn't the end of the world, but it created unnecessary hurdles. So again, sharing a quick chat in the general section, or if you wanted to make another channel devoted to your templates, you could do that, but maybe the general section is a more reasonable location, and it might just as well go in the locked teachers folder. It depends on the precautions that you take within your organization. For the purposes of this section, I'm just putting in the general folder, but keep in mind that access and permissions will be available to anybody in the team in this area, so you may want to put these kind of things into a locked section. All right, so I've shared my communication with everyone. I've made my announcement of sorts, and then just so that new participants and existing members of staff recognize that we were going to be using a standardized set of templates for each of the following things. Just created a folder, made them either in docs or saved images and uploaded them, and things like assessments, right? So if you're using standardized assessments across the organization, at least the template for the assessment, then it may speed up operations a great deal. And at the very least, this again provides a database to centralize where all of that information exists for everybody. Your lesson plan templates, in the event that you're an academic organization or a training organization. Also, this is a big deal because, again, it just streamlines and it gets everybody on the same page. And for those who are attempting to digest that information, if it looks similar to that which they've already seen, it speeds up the process that much more. And the same for syllabus. So one thing we found was there were a handful of different styles based on what people were used to or people's preferences, and all of that is fine. But again, if you're communicating and agreeing about a template or a set of templates, and then agreeing about where those things are going to be stored, all of the participants have the opportunity to copy and paste, make a new style, modify an existing template, and everybody else can be confident that these all fall within an agreed to set of parameters, which streamlines the operation to the point that things can be taken over by somebody who is less familiar with the program. Say somebody gets sick, say somebody's absent for whatever reason. I'm talking about an administrator or an educator. Other people can be confident that these things, these essential materials and resources, exist in an area and in a style with which I'm already familiar. And then you're going to get, also that will help to facilitate participation and collaboration between professionals. So these are really the main considerations for getting started. And this is before any of these things are populated. Any of these groups or channels or folders are populated with your assets. Who has access? Who is running it? what agreements are being made about permissions and structures, and then where are things going to be located. If everybody is on relatively the same page about that handful of, I'll just call them considerations again, then it allows you to get into sort of the dirty work of running classes and creating materials, specific materials and resources for those classes, which is really what everybody is there for. And the overall management and administration of the system or the platform is more or less taken care of.
Now that we've heard from David regarding the more administrative side of Microsoft Teams, and we heard from Amin about how to prepare and manage your classroom, I'm going to walk you through how I prepare and facilitate an online class using Microsoft Teams. First, I like to create a Microsoft Word document. This will be used for in-class notes taken by me, as well as shared to the students in case we have any kind of activities within the document that students can participate in. So I can share this link to students and they can jump into the document and they can do things like fill out tables together, answer their own questions, and it's quite interactive. So we just go to office.com, go to Microsoft Word and select new blank document. Now, the first thing you want to do is save the document, of course, and make sure that it's named something that can be easily found in the future. I've created probably hundreds of these documents, and as long as I have a good naming convention, they can be found easily and organized very easily in the future. So, for example, this can be JALT class October 13th, week 2. If you have some kind of subject module like mathematics or maybe a term like summer term, as many details that will help you find it in the future. Now, once this is saved, we can jump back to Microsoft Teams. The first thing I like to do with new classes is make sure I have my channels set up. Now, let's assume that this is a new class and students have been invited to this team, but class has not begun yet. By default, we have this general channel. Now, general is where all of the classes will take place and special announcements will be made. But we found that we like to keep students out of communicating in this channel because it can tend to be a little bit crowded and kind of messy if people start communicating freely. So we want to go to the general channel and change one of the settings to make sure students cannot send messages to this channel. We go to Manage Channel. By default, it's set to anyone can post messages, but you want to change it to only owners can post messages if you want to keep students from communicating in the main channel. Now, students cannot communicate in the main channel anymore, but I like to create an open discussion channel that you can see here. Now, this channel will be for students to communicate freely. They can ask questions, they can share resources. I like to tell students it's kind of their own area and to speak freely and ask questions. The way we create new channels is we go to the team name and hit these little 3 dots here, add channel, and then type in the name of the channel, open discussion or whatever you like. I like to make sure this is checked because this will automatically show the students this channel in their version of Teams on their end, so it's easily accessible for them. Now, just like David mentioned earlier, we can also create a teacher channel, and this channel will be private, only accessible to teachers and not accessible to students. This is very useful, particularly for attendance sheets, student profiles, and things like discussions between teachers regarding class progress and anything that you want to keep private from students. The way we do that is we just as we created the open discussion channel, we want to go to add channel. However, we want to make sure this is changed to private. We can name the channel whatever we want, teacher channel. And when we click next, we are asked to we are asked to invite teachers to this channel. Now, only the people who are invited here can access this channel. So now that we've set up all the channels for communication, we've made the general channel restricted to only important announcements and important communication from teachers. We've given the students their own channel in which they can communicate with each other. And we've also opened a teacher channel that's private only for teachers to communicate and to share resources. Now, I like to make sure the general channel is set up properly to be kind of a central hub for everything students need throughout the course. So first, I like to make sure all of my tabs are set up. Now, tabs are at the top here, and they kind of stay stuck to the top to be easily accessed. Now, the first tab we have by default is the Files tab. This is a very simple file folder system that can be customized and organized as you need. You can put class materials here. You can put things like digital copies of textbooks, videos, handouts, anything that you want to be accessible to students at any given time throughout a course. Next is the class notebook. Now, Amin mentioned a bit about the class notebook. I don't personally use it because I find it to be a little bit slow. However, it's very useful. Students will get their own private notebooks that's only viewable by the student and the teacher. Now, you can use these notebooks to keep their own notes and to do assignments, and teachers can view their progress and keep up to date with the notes that they're taking. There are also a few other useful things, like assignments can be handed out to each student, which creates a copy of the assignment in the student's private notebook. So the student can work on it alone, and the teacher can see in real time as the student works on it. Next, we have assignments. Now, this is something that I use very often, and I find it to be simple yet very powerful and useful for creating assignments and for students to submit assignments back. As you can see here, I've already created an assignment that David will show you later how this looks on the student end. But let's create one right now to see what this looks like. If we go to create, we can choose assignment or quiz. Now, I usually choose assignment because there's more possibilities, more options to choose. If you choose quiz, this will actually link you to Microsoft Forms, which we use sometimes, and I won't be going into much detail about this, but this will link directly to a Microsoft form, and the Microsoft form can be created by you to be used as kind of a quiz, more of a quiz format. But let's go to create, and let's go to assignment. Of course, we'll enter the title of the assignment here, and then we can add a category. Now, these work kind of like tags, so this is very useful, especially if you have many assignments throughout a course. You can have homework tags and essay. You can even have it based on the subject or based on the type of assignment, and students can view assignments only within that tag. Next, we have enter the instructions. Now, this is just the instructions for the assignment. Complete pages 43 to 42. Don't forget your presentations are due next week. Anything that you like here. And you can also add resources if you have any extra PDF files or videos that might be needed to complete this assignment. Next are where you would add a grading rubric. Now, in my organization, we don't give grades, so I've never used this, but it seems pretty simple. You create your own grading rubric, and this is used to track the performance of students throughout the course. Next, you choose who you will assign this to. Now, by default, of course, the assignment will go to all students, but you can choose to only select certain students. This is useful, for example, if a student is lagging behind performance-wise, you can give him or her maybe an extra assignment that's only for that particular student. Next, we have the due date. Of course, this is when the assignment is due and the time it's due. Now, by default, this will allow students to turn in assignments late, as you can see here. However, this can be changed. If you are a particularly strict teacher, you can set what's called a close date, And this will end the assignment at the given close date. Students will not even be able to view the assignment anymore. Of course, if you do this, make sure the students are aware. Otherwise, it will cause some problems, most likely. Another very useful feature of assignments is scheduling the assignment to appear at some point in the future. Now, this is very useful if you're the type of teacher who likes to plan everything as far enough in advance as possible. You can actually preload all of your assignments for an entire course and schedule them to appear at certain times. For example, even like the final project for a term can be created at the beginning of the term, but it won't actually be viewable to students until a later date. So you click this, you choose when the assignment will be posted to the channel and what time it will be, and of course the due date here. Next, for tabs, we have the Grades tab. Now this is something that my organization does not use. However, this will here will be where students' grades are populated throughout the course, as long as you create some sort of rubric when you're giving out assignments. That's it for the default tabs, but I like to also add more tabs for my classes. Now this depends on what kind of class it is, but one that I like to use every time for all classes is a Resources tab. Now if you click New tab, you will see that there are a very wide variety of different tabs you can use. I like to choose the Wiki tab to create my Resources tab. Now I find this to be very simple and very fast for this purpose. It's basically a list that can be modified and changed and added. So let's call this Resources. Again, it's pretty simple. You have page names, and within you have pages, and then within each page you have sections. So what I use this for is resources for different types of learning materials, things that will be useful throughout the course for students to easily access. So this can be maybe vocabulary resources, and under vocabulary can be collocations or learning new vocabulary. And then under each section, we can post web page links, we can post videos, we can create tables, we can insert images. And students also find this to be very useful for their progress throughout a course. So we've set up a few tabs here, and we're a little bit closer to the general channel becoming the students' kind of main hub for learning and for classes. Now, because the teachers can only communicate in the general channel and students cannot send messages, I sometimes like to use this as a place to make important announcements. By default, all messages sent to the general channel will appear as very basic text messages, kind of like the one that Amin has posted here. However, there is a way to make more important announcements. If you go to New Conversation and click this little letter with kind of like a paintbrush here, it will open up a more advanced message editor. If you go to New Conversation, you can change this to Announcement. You can type a headline, "Welcome to English class." This can be used for maybe the first day of class. Students can kind of get a nice welcome message. We can change the color of the header, and we can also choose different illustrations. So depending on what kind of announcement it is, it can be just a general announcement or something regarding the class. Maybe you're going on like a trip somewhere or something like that. And then of course add a header and a subheader here. Now, by default, all messages will not alert members of a team. However, you might want to make sure students know about something very, very, very important. Now, how do we do that? Well, one thing we can do is we can tag individual people. But that gets a little bit tedious when you have a classroom of 15, 20 students or more, and you want to type the name of every single student. How do we get around that? Well, if we go to our team settings here, and we go to Manage Team, we can add tags to our students. Now, David mentioned this before in regards to adding tags for different members of your organization, but it can also be used for managing your students. So we can tag each student with the tag students, and then once we go to post an important announcement, we can say @students. Remember that your presentations are due tomorrow. If you have any questions, please ask me, or something like that. And this will guarantee that all students will get a very important alert on their Microsoft Teams app. So there's no excuse for not seeing these tagged messages. Now, tags can also be useful for things like if you have different groups within your classroom, different kind of groups that work together on projects and things like that. You can add them to their own specific tags and then tag those groups as you want. So as far as setting up these channels, that's the basics of what I do. Now, after I've got everything set up, then the class will begin. So let's say this is day 1 of your first class, and we are ready to start our first online class. Now, first we will click the Meet button in the corner. Make sure you're in the General channel and click the Meet button. And then we name our meeting. Now, in our organization, we like to record all of our online classes, so we need to make sure that the naming convention is established and it's named something that can be searched for easily later. Of course, after the meeting is recorded, you can change the name of the recorded class. However, that can be, an extra step you probably don't need to take if you just name your class something easily searchable in the future. So let's say this is JALT English class, October 13, whatever you think is useful for your class. We click Join Now. Now, once this is started, it will send an alert to everybody in this team that this has begun. So students are usually pretty good at jumping in pretty quickly to this online class. However, if they are not, you can type the name of the student and invite him or her directly to the online class. And then they will accept that invitation and they will be right in here. Now let's assume all the students have joined. We're ready to begin. What I like to do is download an attendance sheet for after class, because especially with larger classes, I find it can be a little bit awkward to have students sitting in silence while you make sure everyone is here. Fortunately, Microsoft Teams has a very handy little feature. If we click the 3 dots here, and we click Download Attendance List, this will give us an Excel sheet, just a simple list of everybody who is in this class right now. Next, if it's the first day of class, I, of course, give students a walkthrough, and I show them features like the Raise Your Hand feature, which Amin mentioned. This can be very useful for those more shy students who don't feel that they can speak freely. So just tell them, if you have a question or if you want to say something, just click raise your hand, and this will make a little alert here. Once I've kind of run them through everything and we're actually ready to begin our lesson, I like to share a link to that Microsoft Word document that I created at the beginning before the class started. Now we click share. And make sure, because students invited as guests are not members of your organization. So make sure this can be accessible to anyone with the link. And if you want students to edit this document, you can make sure this is checked. If you don't want them to edit, you can uncheck this depending on what you're using this for. Click apply, click copy link, click copy. And then I like to post this link to the discussion channel here. And then students can access this in real time. I also like to share my screen and have them see a live update of that same document. And to do that, all you need to do is click Share Content, and then choose whichever window that your document is in. In my case, it's this Chrome window. Now, this is also where you would share things like your screen for watching videos together. You can also access the whiteboard here, as Amin mentioned. And if you have a PowerPoint presentation, a slideshow, you can click Browse here, and it will link directly to your Microsoft OneDrive files, and you can choose your PowerPoint slideshow here. So for actually holding the class, that's the basics of what I like to use. I try to keep things as interactive as possible by sharing my screen and having students collaborate with the Word document as much as they can. But other than that, that's basically it. So let's say class is finished, everything's done. Goodbye, students. Thank you. See you next week. We end the call by clicking leave, and that's it. So now that class is finished, maybe you want to do something with those notes that you were taking during class. Let's go back to that document. By default, this document is saved in your OneDrive folder, in the root folder. So they're not organized in any kind of way. So maybe you want to organize them, put them in a different folder, or maybe you want to make them accessible to students in the class. If we go to File and Save As, you can save a copy online here. Click Save to another folder. Make sure that your document is named the way you want it to be. Save to another folder. And here is your OneDrive folder list. And on the left, we have our teams, our classes. If we click on the class and click, well, we have two choices. Class materials links directly to the general channels class materials. So if we go to Files, all general channels have a class materials folder by default. Or if we click Documents, this will take us to our channel list, and we can save this in a different channel. So maybe you have some sort of discussion channel, and you have a document that you want to copy over to that channel. This is how it can be done. But let's go back to JALT 2020, class materials, click Save. This document is still on our OneDrive account, but now if we go back here and maybe refresh this, class materials, we've got that same document accessible in the team.
Okay, so the organizers of the team have sent out invitations to students. I am cleverly posing as a student right now. You can see that I've gotten the email here, and it gives me the team name, and it says that I've been invited, and it says that someone by the name of Christian has invited me. So I'm going to open Teams. It immediately goes to the website, and I have a choice to use the app or download onto my desktop. I'm using the app, and there you can see that I have been added to the team. I can see general and open discussion options. There I've been able to submit a conversation. I can also start a new conversation there. And if there were anything in the files section that I had access to, I could access it from here. And and I can also store my own files within this section, and use Microsoft OneNote, which I immediately get access to. You can see at the top here, I have a link to set up meetings if I wanted to with others within the group. So that's a nice function for the students. And then this opens up a classroom notebook, which I believe has already been discussed earlier. I won't open that because there's nothing in there anyway. Okay, so as a student, I have been sent an assignment, and I get a notification here in my activity panel. So I'll click that, and it tells me that I have been given an assignment. And I've got something here that says new. So there are also resources which have been shared here. So as a student, I have access to that. But for assignments, I'll go into the assignments section, which is a tab at the top, and I can see here that I have homework, and it gives me the information that I need I can turn it in here. It tells me if there are any points associated with it. I can see instructions. I can upload work here. So this is ends up being a database where students can submit all of their work, and anybody who has access to the channel and to the team can also access the students' work.